Ryan and Greg, how you doing?
You're doing well. How are you, Randy?
Excellent, thanks. Ryan, how you doing?
I'm I'm doing better and better, better
Excellent. Look,
and
you
better.
you are all ready to be dialing. Looks like both you guys. So we've got Welcome to Tech Sales Insights, brought to you today by Phone Ready Leads and Reveneer, and always by Sales Community. For those that are members, thanks. For those that are not, Tucker will put the link up. You can get a free membership by going to salescommunity.com/summer free, and I guess pretty soon we'll have maybe fall free. We have an awesome title topic today, Sell More by Getting More, live conversations with prospects. In the world of all this kind of online, LinkedIn, email, reps being wussies in terms of not wanting to, do actual cold calling. This will be a great session, a lot of great takeaways, whether you're a leader or brand new out of college, SDR or BDR. So Greg Casale is the founder of Reveneer, awesome business that we will hear more about. And Ryan Reisert, founder of Phone Ready Leads, another awesome business. So jumping right into it, I know we're all kind of preaching the choir here, but nothing converts better than a live conversation. Ryan, why do you say that?
Well, at the end of the day, when we're in a sales position, we're talking about conversion, right? Revenue. Uh, you can do all the activities, you can do all the emails, you can do all the clicks and responses and DMs, you can even make the dials. But nothing's going to matter until you actually connect and, more importantly, have a meaningful sales interaction, which at the end of the day is a conversation, right? You need to establish a one-to-one dialogue with your prospect in order to, you know, start the process. And so start sales begins with that conversation. And so it's kind of by definition, right? Nothing's going to convert better than, let's just start where the means ends, uh, by design.
Absolutely. And Greg, I'm sure you're in violent agreement.
Yeah, I mean, if you can dial a phone, somebody's mobile number today, they pick up the phone, you're automatically in a conversation, and everything starts with a conversation. You have the opportunity to ask questions, even if they're going to shut you down and raise an objection. You learn something on that call that you won't learn if they just ignore your email. So, best way to get into a conversation is to dial the phone and have someone pick up.
Yeah. And what's your take? Do you get, and obviously this is your business at Reveneer outsource outbound cold calling, but what do you see in terms of like pushback? Anybody or people to say, hey, why are you doing call my cell phone? Or is it now just kind of the norm and totally accepted?
Well, specific to cell phones, you're right. I mean, we used to get, hey, don't call my cell phone. Now more than ever, and particularly with remote work and post pandemic, people are listing their mobile numbers as their office line in their signature blocks. More than that, we can call mobile numbers morally and ethically and legally in B2B, different consumers, but for B2B. So less and less people are surprised that you're calling their cell phone. They may not want to talk to you when they realize it's a sales call, but that's the nature of the beast. But we're not finding that there's this, big surprise that someone's calling their cell phone for a business call.
Yeah. And I would imagine probably kind of pre-COVID, people would be more wigged out about it. But as you just said, now kind of going through COVID and post-COVID, it's one of several new norms that we now have, right?
Yeah, I don't know too many people that have really carried their office line to their home or mobile office or wherever they're working from. It seems weird to say that now. So these
Yeah.
directory trees and things like that are just kind of no man's land. So, and the mobile numbers are available now through sourcing. We can get them, and they're good, they're accurate. So we should be using them, and we are. And it's one of the reasons why connect rates have held up. They're not going down. They're as strong as they've ever been, and so many companies aren't taking advantage of it.
Wow. So Ryan, you guys are in the weeds of the kind of math science side of things. So maybe help us understand some of the metrics, conversations versus dials, et cetera.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at the end of the day, I like to call this the math of sales, but simple equation. If you're going to get a deal on the door, starts with activity, so dials. The next conversion is a connect. The next conversion from there is actually a conversation. Greg and I agree on that. Some people muddy those two. From a conversation, you're probably going to track meetings to meetings held to opportunities created or qualified, and then deals closed, right? So all of those ratios stem up to what do we call the math of sales. At the very top, over the last decade or so, to Greg's point, the connect rate. So how many dials does it take to get somebody that you intend to reach? Not a gatekeeper, not an admin, like the person you intended to reach hasn't really fluctuated. If you look at stats from all the way back to 2010, 2012 till right now, you're sitting somewhere in this like 2 to, I would say 10, 12% range, depending on the line types, industry and segment, things like that. So obviously there's a variance in there, but 2 to 12% is probably where you would see a range, and the average sits in this like 5 to 7%, right? So if you were to just pull a list cold from a major premium data vendor and you make 100 calls, you can expect around 5 to 7 live connects. That's connects, not conversations, but how many dials does it take to get a conversation or a connect rather? It's going to sit in that range depending on vertical industry target.
So basically, industry average, if they're not using phone ready leads as an example, would be kind of one hit out of every 20.
Yep.
And then what would you consider, I guess, kind of be a best practice or higher end once they're able to use the phone ready lead swizzle?
Well, with or without phone ready leads, if you're doing, what I would call modern outbound sales development, which is you make a list, you call the list, and you follow up. If you're going through a process of dialing the phone, the very first time you call a list, you'd be sitting in that 1 to 20 range, right? So I make a list of 100, I call it one time, I get a conversation every 20 dials. But as you make attempts against a list, you really should be what I would call validating, right? So you're going to work a list from uncontacted to working. I wrote about this in my book, Outbound Sales No Fluff, several years ago. This process is called bucketing, but I'm going to go from uncontacted to working. And while I'm doing that, what I want to be doing is actually trying to identify on my list which leads are most likely reachable. Those are the ones I want to keep dialing, right? If I call them enough times, they'll pick up the phone, versus which ones are most likely workable. What's workable is where cold calling goes to die. These are numbers that when I call them, if I call them into infinity, they'll never answer the phone. And then finally, I want to weed out all my bad data, right? So there's really 3 lead types on any given list. You got bad data, workable data, reachable data. So if I'm working a list for the first time, I want to be able to segment, sort, and filter into a process that says the next time I go around, these ones are most likely worth calling. These ones may not be worth calling. And if you do that and you actually run this process over time, your average connect rate on a list is going to go from, say, 5% to something like 25%.
Awesome. And thank you. We have first question comment here. So I should have said earlier. So this is LinkedIn Live, so you can see us or hear us. We cannot see you, but anything you post for questions or comments, we got Tucker helping behind the scenes as always. So thanks, Tucker. So looks like a long one here. So from Subir, hopefully I said your name right. Apologize if not.
I think he's just trying to spam us right now, Randy.
Let's skip it. All right, good try. Good try. All right. So great info there on the metrics. Greg, anything that you would chime in on that?
Yeah, I think I hope people will kind of read about what Ryan just described, because it really is important in the way that you can statistically work down your list to give yourself a higher probability to get a connect. Sometimes I use this kind of stupid example of you're trying to pull a black marble out of a jar of white marbles, and there's statistically you could get it on the first try. Each time you try, the probability of getting the black marble goes up because you're taking white marbles out. The one wrinkle to it is some jars have no black marble. And so I find it's very binary in that there are people who pick up the phone and there are people who don't. You could call them 100 times, they'll never pick up. And I think what Ryan's saying is, identifying the ones that are likely to pick up and then the ones that never will is an important part of getting the statistics to work for you. We advocate making up to a dozen, 12 to 15 dials on any one contact over calling 3 to 4 times a week. So you're calling for a couple of weeks on a contact in order to see if they're the kind of people that pick up the phone. You could get them first try, second try, fifth, seventh, eighth. But once you get past that bell curve of say 7 or 8, the probability goes down and you might want to move in. You don't have to go that high, but that's our business, so we do. But you want to understand that probability. And this is what's missed when people say, well, you know, I called once or twice and nobody picked up, so I sent an email. You didn't give yourself enough of a shot. And then also people will say, well, I never pick up my phone if I don't know the number. So why would that work? And it's a paradox. There are those people, maybe us on the call, who won't pick up the phone if we don't know the number.
I pick up. That's how Ryan got to me the first time. But anyway.
All right. Yeah, so there are people who do. So you're trying to find the ones that do, because those are the ones that you get immediately to a conversation. And it's only 5%, 6%, 7%. And then the last thing I'll say is when we talk about averages, like, you know, we talked about 2% to, 10, 11, 12%, that's the range. It's really important that you don't build your outbound on averages. You want to know statistically what is the connect rate for my persona in a company of the size I'm trying to reach, because it's different. If you're doing outbound at 2% versus outbound at 5.5, 6, very different. And if you don't set expectations with your leadership team and with your SDRs, they can get very discouraged. So you want to know those. And that's one thing we get to see a lot of because we're calling all different personas. But you want to build enough of a statistical database to know what the connect rate is or what it should be, or go get that information through some other source.
Yeah, and I guess at the end of the day, it's all about setting the right expectations and making sure you're exceeding those relative to what leadership wants.
Well, and to piggyback on that too, to give some data behind some of the stuff that Greg said, and he's spot on, right? So on any given list, if you call them enough times, generally you're going to be able to reach 20 to 40% of your audience, right? So if I have 100 people and I call them enough times, let's say 20 plus times, which would really go beyond trying, right? You're probably going to get 20 to 40% of any list. So that's what I would call reach. But to Greg's point, that 5 to 7 range, 5 to 6, 7 dials, that's actually the sweet spot. The Pareto principle is in play here. So if I call a list up to 5 to 7 times, I'm going to have reached about 80% of that 20 to 40%. So 80% of the ones that are likely to pick up will have picked up within that 5 to 7 range. By 10, you've now reached about 95%. And then by 20, you would get to 98% of the total picker-uppers. Now you can keep calling it into infinity if you'd like. And what I mean by that is, like, you can hammer lists. And the reason why I know this data really well is for about 7 years, I was a massive user of Connect and Sell. And so Connect and Sell is a system that does parallel assisted dialing. And so we could load a list, click go, and it'll just rip out dials. And you can see over time, what lists have been hit enough times. And so that range there is not based on like a sample size of, let's say, a couple thousand records. This is tens of millions of dials worth of data over several years now. And that's the range you're going to be playing with. And so once you know that math, you can be pretty confident with your strategy around, once I've tried them enough times and I know I can't reach them, then I can start to compound into the other channels. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But if you're going to use the phone, you can't give up at 1 or 2 attempts, right? You're only going to get to about 20, maybe 30% of the total reachable audience on the phone if you do that.
Awesome. And we have a real question now from Leo. So thank you, Leo. Are you finding that local dialers or alternating the number you are calling from helps connections, or would you rather have them see the same number trying to reach them? Greg?
So, and I know Ryan has some good stuff to share on this too, relative to how this works today. But I do think the local dialers are somewhat have reached their maximum advantage. I think that's sort of peaked in the sense that most of us that get calls all the time know that if it looks like a very local number, it's probably a sales call. I don't think it means that people don't pick up. I think if you're the kind of person that picks up, you're probably going to pick up anyway. I don't think it has that advantage that it did maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where somebody's intrigued, they think maybe it's somebody they know and they pick up. I don't think that dynamic's happening. So I don't think it hurts you. I don't think it helps you. But Ryan, I remember the conversation we had about a week ago about what you have to be mindful of in the numbers that you are using to dial, right? I think with the stir shake, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting these days, and I actually have some data around local versus not local too, just because we had made a switch on our technology that enables another way of doing things. So the first thing to note is, I'm going to go a little bit deep. You can kick me, just tap me, guys, if I'm getting too nerdy here, right? So
You're gonna geek us out on calling.
Yeah. So stir shaken, if you're not aware of that, is a mandate by the TCPA. They're trying to combat robo calling, right? So not too different than when GDPR and CCPA rolled out a couple years ago. Email deliverability became a problem, right? You can only send so many emails, and like Google's like you'll get your domain burned, things like that.
Yeah.
Stir shaken will do the same thing with your phone numbers, right? So you think about your phone number just like your email domain, right? So your number is an ID that's going to get sent to carriers, and those carriers are going to monitor how you're using that ID, and that ID itself is going to get monitored by each carrier. And there's lots of carriers, so you can get flagged by one and not by another. But there's an algorithm at play here with these numbers that will get you flagged fairly quickly. So the first thing you want to know is if you're using the same CID, not rotating at all. If I just have one caller ID and I'm calling, I actually don't want to make more than 80 dials in an entire day. If I go over 80 dials in one day, the carrier is going to potentially flag you as spam, right? So this is like that send limit on email. Same thing with phone. There's a dial limit, which for a lot of you might be like, wow, that's not that many dials, and it's not. Now this is going to shock you even more, right? 80 in a day. What I'm seeing is you probably don't want to do more than 10 in an hour with that same CID, right? So 80 in a day, 10 in an hour, which is not that high of a dial velocity, although there's a lot of SDRs here that are like, they only do their 20 or 30 dials a day, so they're probably okay. But 10 in an hour, 80 in a day, that's one CID. So if you're dialing at a velocity of greater than 10 an hour, you absolutely want to be rotating your CID, because again, these carriers are looking at that CID. How often is it firing? And then when it's firing, they're also looking at your connect rate. So is this a number that you know? Are you calling people you know, or are you calling people you don't know? Again, they're trying to identify spam. So if your connect rate's lower, it means you're probably calling people you don't know. That's their hypothesis, right? So connect rate is a function of their algorithm. And then there's also talk time. So talk time, once I connect, like what's the average talk time if I'm calling someone I know? It's much higher than if someone just picks up and says I'm not interested and hangs up on you, right? So talk time's a factor. And then finally, there's the actual ability to get flagged, right? If someone actually marks you as spam when you're calling, those are all factors that come into play here. So just geeked out a little bit around how to think about the numbers and velocity of dialing. So when it comes to the specific question here about rotation, it's super important, right? You want to be rotating your numbers, own multiple numbers that rotate if you're dialing at more than 10 an hour, which most people in a sales development or a sales position who's responsible for doing like their own sourcing or prospecting, they're probably doing that. Even if it's just a moment in time, I might sit down and rip 30 dials. You got to rotate those numbers so you don't get marked as spam likely, scam likely. So very important. Now, last year, for the first 2 years of my business, actually, I used an app called Phone Burner. Phone Burner has an application with local presence. They call it local ID. And Phone Burner's restriction on their ability to rotate numbers. The reason why I use this feature is we do lots of dials, right? To the tune of 500,000 or so a month is what we're doing on our system, right? Lots of dials. So we have to rotate lots of numbers. And what their restriction is their local ID, which allowed the number rotation, meant that we could only use it on a state-by-state basis. So we had to own multiple IDs per state. If I was calling into the Pacific Northwest and I was in Washington, Idaho, and Oregon, I can't rotate my Idaho numbers into Washington, et cetera. That was a restriction of their app. And so all of the things that we're doing, we're not localized down to like I'm trying to match the last 4, as Greg was alluding to earlier. That is going to get a lot of people who are used to being called, like, it's just going to put their spidey senses up. But it was localized to the region, right? So by state, it's going to localize around city, well, zip, city, state outwards, right? And it's going to rotate those numbers accordingly. And so last year when we were doing that, when we were calling what we know are high propensity phone picker uppers, our average connect rate was maxing out about 20%. So when we use local ID for presence, we went from like a 5% to a 20%. And I thought that was phenomenal, right? It's a big, big, big leap forward. You know, getting a conversation every 5 dials versus every 20 dials is pretty good. But Phone Burner had an issue at the beginning of this last year, or this year actually, back in January, and we had to shift into a new application. This new application is called FrontSpin. Inside of FrontSpin, they have a numbers package, but their numbers package can be randomized. And so randomizing the numbers is the same general concept. We own lots of numbers that are rotating, but now I'm not localized when I'm randomizing my numbers. And since we've moved to randomized presence, which is just anywhere around the US, right? Our average connect rate has now gone from 20% to it's actually 26% now. So last year is 20.7% at the end of the year. This year it's 26% when we're calling the people we know that picked up. It was just significant increase in the average connect rate. So again, geeked out a bit there. Hopefully that answers your question to the fullest. Now, if you get down to like a very small subset of the answers here, there are some people that are more likely to pick up with a local number than some people that are not. But big data shows that random presence actually gets you more shots on goals than local presence.
Wow. So Leo, you now have a PhD in calling. Yeah, amazing. So I think you brought up a lot of kind of traps or trap doors that could be out there. Any other things to chime in on from a trap perspective, Ryan?
Well, so these are some of the things, you know, Greg and I just went through this recently. So when it comes to connect rate, and we're talking about that first path towards deliverability, right? How many dials does it take for me to reach my audience and try to go from a connect to a meaningful conversation? There's a couple things to look at, right? So the first is the numbers themselves. So we just hit on that. You got to make sure that you've got a system in place that can monitor, scan, and rotate these numbers, so you're not coming up as spam likely, scam likely, right? Getting back to Greg's point about the mobile being powerful, for us, about 80% of our total connects come from mobile numbers. So 80% of our potential reaches are susceptible to coming up as spam likely, scam likely. So if you come up as spam likely, scam likely on a number, your number itself, you got to rotate that so you don't get spam or come up as spam likely, and your connect rate will drop. So your numbers are there an issue. The next is the actual the technology itself. So some of these dialers outside of number rotation also have call deliverability issues, like their packets, right? If you're using like a Twilio dialer, things like that, like calls, like reps are clicking and it's not actually connecting and ringing through. So they're logging dials, but they're not actually full dials. So you got to make sure that your reps are actually hearing the phone ring through. And then another really important piece here is ringing through to, if they don't pick up, a voicemail, right? A lot of reps give up way too early on some of these phone numbers, right? I don't know where this came from, but I hear like a lot of leaders being like, oh yeah, if it rings 3 times and they haven't picked up, hang up. It's like, it's a really bad idea, right? Let the phone ring through to completion, and completion on the ringing is get to that voicemail. And when you get to that voicemail, especially if it's the first time, make sure you're listening through that voicemail. There's a lot of value in that voicemail, right? Sometimes people will tell you, I don't pick up the phone here, you know, try my mobile. Like you're calling a desk line, try my mobile. You'll get a mobile number from a voicemail, or they'll tell you they're on vacation for the next week. There's lots of information in that voicemail to let you know what you're doing. And then finally, if the technology is not an issue, numbers being burned, the dialer actually delivering, it's actually rep behavior. That just goes back to when you're not calling direct lines, you've got to go through the dial trees. You got to go through operators, which, by the way, can be a pain in the ass. But if you navigate through and you know you can reach someone through there, these are the best numbers. You actually see about almost a 2x lift in conversion if you can get through a operator or an IVR. A lot less of them. There's only about 5 or 10% on any given list that this is possible. But when you can get through them, these are very valuable numbers, and most reps will give up, right? So these are numbers like you have to get through an operator, ask for the transfer. If, you know, IVRs, dial through, right? You can learn a lot more going through those voicemails, capturing our numbers, and you can get picker-uppers. And then finally, that element of you might be seeing more and more of these if you're a actual professional caller right now, is you're seeing these robo killers, Google Voice, some of these like spam filters that come on top of phone numbers. Reps will just ditch those calls, but go through those. Those are very valuable. Those are very valuable numbers, and we see reps sometimes come across those leads and they'll give up on them. You give up on numbers like that, and obviously the total number of dials you're making versus the connect's going to plummet, and your math's going to be messed up. But Greg, I'll just talked a whole lot. I'll let you chime in on some of that.
Yeah, no, nothing to add there. I think you're the encyclopedia on that topic, and I rely on you, and I'm taking notes here. So this is great. There is a question there I see from Tyler, who's one of our old friends at Reveneer, former Reveneer guy. Tyler's asking about power dialers, and I think these are great. These are great products. We don't use them probably for kind of an odd reason. I think that they have a place. Now, of course, what these are doing is dialing in the background, and you can get through as many as 100 dials in an hour, and it's sending you the ones that connect. For our operation, we found that they didn't give the rep enough time to process who was picking up the phone, what the relevance was that they wanted to use on the call. In other words, what research they had done in order to warm that call up. So it was very difficult to have a warm research call. Now that's us. I don't want to blanket talk about that, but particularly if you're doing calling where there's not a lot of differentiation with who you're calling, your pitch is the same regardless, then I think you can get a lot of volume here, and you can certainly increase your number of conversations on a daily basis. Wasn't for us, but they certainly make an impact for sure.
Well, and I can speak to these because this is this is actually why I created phone rate leads. So 7-8 years ago, I was probably the #1 advocate for this type of technology, not the AI powered versions like Nooks or Orem, but the human powered versions, which was the Connect and Cells of the world. And back then, I used to believe that the connect rate was the connect rate, 3 to 5%. And so if I'm going to get the efficiency out of my team, then I need to make more dials. You want more conversations, you have to make more dials. But the reality is there's a tremendous amount of scorched earth when you're using these tools. So the benefit of running the process, and again, I can link it in here if you guys want to read the chapter of a book. I think I posted it somewhere for free on my profile, but buckets, right? The whole process of buckets allows you to filter and sort your data in such a way where you don't need technology like this, right? If you actually make a list, call the list, and you understand which ones are worth calling, which ones are not calling, parallel dialing actually reduces the amount of reach, going back to that number I care about, that you're going to get on any given list. And because of stir shaken, unless these technologies are doing a really good job of rotating those numbers, scanning and replacing them, there's a really good chance that you're just burning a bunch of numbers. And while you're dialing, even if they're replacing them at the rate that they're replacing them, you're still missing out on opportunities. The other issue is also if you've ever been on the receiving end of this, there's a tremendous amount of dead air connects, which is extremely frustrating, right? You call, yeah, you're like, hello, hello, hello. That's likely because that's the dead air connect is the parallel dialing that's happening, right? They're calling at the same time. 2 people pick up, 1 drops. So you're really just spamming your customers. And then the final piece here, okay, let's assume that all that's true. And to Greg's point, I agree. You got a big TAM. You want to rip a bunch of dials. Sure, you could do that. But the rep who's on the other end of this calling, and I used to coach this, I used to train it, and I used to be the #1 advocate for this. They're not set up for success, right? There's gonna be a beep. They have to talk. They get scared. They don't know what to say. They don't even know who it is. They're just talking through their mouth. The experience is not great. And so you're solving for the wrong problem in the wrong order. At the end of the day, what we want to do is actually be meaningful of the people we're reaching out to, right? You're on my list because I believe I can serve you, right? That's #1. You're on my list for that purpose. Now, when I call you, I want to be prepared to explain why I'm calling. And with parallel dialing, it's very difficult to achieve a very good first impression. And so sales is about the speed of trust. Your trust is eliminated, and you just don't get as much success. So yeah, your connect rate or number of connects that you could get might start around the same, but if you look at that performance of a list over time, it's dramatically um, lower than if you actually just process the list properly. And again, that's why I created phone ready leads. But I mean, I have tens of millions of dials worth of data that shows that approach is just old school. There's a new way of doing things.
Totally. When you're talking about trust, Ken Doherty's a good friend that Greg knows as well, but he's a big fan of the know me, like me, trust me, which if you're doing face-to-face enterprise sales, you got some time to do, but you just brought up the point, okay, you're on the call, you got like seconds, you don't have minutes or hours or days or months to go through that. So Greg, from a kind of calling being kind of industry agnostic or not, it's pretty much, would you say it is pretty agnostic or what?
Yeah, surprisingly, there are industries that I would not recommend phone first. And I'm not necessarily going to lay those out, but in our business, we get to see all different industries and we pull data. So we've been amassing call data for 7 or 8 years now, millions and millions of data points. So if a prospect customer of my customer was to give me a profile and say, I want to get a hold of a director of IT at companies that are $500 billion or more in the automotive vertical, we could pull pretty statistically significant data on connect rates. If those connect rates come out really low, then I'm going to give Ryan a call and do something there. And incidentally, this is exactly what we've done with phone ready leads. And by the way, I'm a paying customer. I've never gotten anything free from Ryan, so I can say that. But you want to understand those metrics, because I think there's a place for outbound in just about any industry. I'll say that because of the value you get from the live conversation. It might not exactly work out on a dollar for dollar ROI of what you're paying a rep to do outbound calls and what you can convert, but you will learn more in the insights you will gather by having conversations with your prospects in any industry. But all that said, there are industries that you don't have the accessibility to the people through phone, and therefore it can be less valid. Now, the easy example of that would be, let's take a time when everyone wasn't on their mobile phone. And I'm not saying go back to, when you and I were young people, Randy, but I'm talking about not like pre-pandemic where people were sort of working in offices, they were on an office line. You had a lot of people like, people in the field working in the oil and gas industry who were pretty senior people, but they happen to work in the field. They're not taking those kinds of calls during the day. So there are industries where we would say they have low accessibility of high value targets. So we might recommend outbound is going to be a struggle. But I think those are probably few and far between. I'd say for the most part, you should be calling outbound. Most of the time when I hear someone say outbound doesn't work in my industry, or I can't get people on the phone in my industry, they just haven't done it enough times and they haven't done it in the right way to make that assessment. We all know from LinkedIn, right? It's people are so quick to dismiss the phone because they don't understand the math and science behind it. And it's complicated. You can hear Ryan talk about it. This is complex stuff. It's kind of beyond the reach of most just sort of sales leaders where you should know this stuff. It's gotten to the point of complexity where you need experts to help you. And that's one of I think the biggest messages we can get across here is this isn't just pick up a phone and go dial.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
No, go ahead, Randy. I didn't mean to interrupt.
How old am I? So back, when I first started, EMC days, we call it telemarketing, May of '85, you had no email, you had no LinkedIn, voicemail was kind of started, I think like a year or so afterwards. So you're basically it's just amazing to think about all these kind of tools and accessibility that you have now versus kind of what it used to be like, but it's still the same art, a lot more science with it, a lot more tools, but I just find it fascinating. Let me just jump into a question here from Mark. What are your thoughts on incorporating personality data platforms similar to Crystal Knows and the impact they'll have on their phones? Either of you, Ryan?
Yeah, sure. So I used to actually have something. I'm in my new office now, but I used to have something posted on the bottom of this board here is a book called Navigate 2.0, written by the CEO of Southwestern Consulting, which is a sales training company, kind of like Sandler out of the South. And the whole idea is that there's like 4 personality types, fits right into the DISC personality, right? And there is an advantage to understanding someone's personality in sales. The challenge with cold calling is most people are not very advanced anyway. So like just getting out the basic script is hard enough for them. Having to deviate to 4 different variations is very difficult. You know, Humantic's another one that's popped up recently. And so like if there's a possibility for you to sub some variants into your system because you're really advanced, I do this, right? If you actually ever listen to any of my calls, I have a very methodical approach where I'm actually listening to the words, phrases, and sentences of people's mouths. You know, the way they answer, who is this? Or, oh, hey, how's it going? Like these little things will adjust how I would approach my next sentence. But for the average caller, on a cold call, you're going to have a hard time inserting personality into like success. I do think there's a place for it down funnel if the tools are accurate. Getting into a meeting and understanding, should I be, you know, if I'm working with an entertainer, right, a more friendly person, should I take the time to build rapport versus if I'm working with a fighter, should I get right into it, right? Those are the types of things that you could bring to the table. For cold calling, it's a very, very advanced tactic. There's definitely value there, but you have to be really skilled before you can take advantage of something like that.
Totally. And I'd find more like you mentioned DISC profile. So Humantic, Tucker, I don't know if we can post a link there, but is a really cool tool that kind of automates all that. It's probably more for kind of follow-on conversation because you're dialing, you just get people there quick. So presumably you do the dial, you get them to agree and hopefully several minutes to do a follow-up. Then when you're going to do the follow-up with that person, more of a higher touch, you're planning ahead of time, then you can do your homework and do your pre-work. So thanks here for others chiming in. So to your prior points before, Tyler says, agreed. I find the dead air creates an awkward intro, results in a hang up. Thanks for the insight. And then Tyler also chimed in, Kayla, totally personalized phone calls will always trump spam, in my opinion. And then Kayla says, where am I here? Tyler, I struggle with this daily as well using CAS. I often think to myself, why would a lead answer the phone just to hang up? That's a good point. Mm-hmm. It has to be because they're sensing something off on their end. So interesting thing there as well. So Greg, you must get times where you have people, your callers kind of get somebody on the phone. Maybe they thought it was somebody else. So kind of, are there any kind of tricks that you say, hey, okay, somebody's going to hang up. You got 5 or 10 seconds. What are you going to say to keep them on the phone?
Well, I think this really goes to what we've been talking about here, which is you've got to do your homework on who it is that you're calling. And we believe at Reveneer that the opening of your call needs to be specific to the person that you're calling. Something in your opening needs to reference something that is unique to that person that you found in your research. And I'm not talking about goofy like Facebook stuff, like, you know, where they went to college and stuff like that. I'm talking about something of interest that you found when you were doing
making fun of my background?
No, I looked at you either got a lot of kids you're paying tuition on, or no, you kept getting kicked out of school. Yeah, I think that these tools, there's so many things you can put in your sales stack. And let's say you're a sales leader and you go to a great demo on Humantic or something like that, and you're like, wow, if I can just put this in the hands of my SDRs, it's going to be magic because they're going to know all this information about the person that they're calling. The challenge that Ryan pointed out is real. If you haven't developed muscle memory to where your brain can be processing what this person is saying, you can be listening and thinking about what you're going to say next, you're never going to be able to use that information. You're going to completely seize up. So the way that we should be looking at these sales tools is use them sparingly with the people that have the skills to be able to apply them at the right time. Don't put them a blanket across the sales operation. And I know Mark who answered the question, and he's got a ton of experience. He's someone who could use a product like this, right? Very advanced, to be able to work these things into the conversation. If you have a brand new SDR and they're trying to remember, how do I handle basic objections like, I don't have time, I'm not interested, they're not going to be able to pull these things in. And so much of these sales stacks have become bloated because we had the ability to buy these things and we rolled them out on the organization. And instead of creating all this great efficiency and results, they ended up kind of bogging people down that were trying to learn the basic muscle memory. So you got to lay the muscle memory down first. And if you find certain reps that are grasping it, now you can bring in these advanced tools and techniques. Just like if you were training in anything, right? A sport, or, you want to be able to give it to them at the right time. So I think there's so many great tools of it. AI is going to be the same thing here, right? Everyone's going to want to apply AI to everything, like conversational intelligence and stuff like that. Very valuable, very useful, but don't just put them across the organization. You've got to find the right spots.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, Ryan, it's still people to people, right?
Yeah. At the end of the day, be human. I think so. Don't overthink it. And the other thing is, if you understand the math about this stuff too, and getting into, we talked about the top of funnel stuff, but I don't think this gets harped enough either. There's a great book out there written, I think it's in like 2008, Chet Holmes' The Ultimate Sales Machine. He's got this concept, the buyer's pyramid. And this data has rang true up until this day. Unfortunately, Chet Holmes passed away several years ago. But if he was around today, he would be rolling over his grave with some of the things that people talk about. But anyway, in this buyer's pyramid, 3% of your market's buying now. It's any market, right? 7% are open to it. 30% aren't thinking about it. And then you got 30% that don't think they're interested, and 30% that know they're not interested. You flip that over and you think about that from a funnel, right? Right out the gate, 6 out of 10 conversations don't think they're interested, no, they're not interested. And so what we find with a lot of people calling is they think that every person they get on the phone is going to be interested in wanting to talk. And that's just not true. Actually, more often than not, they're not interested. And I kind of look at this as baseball. Randy, you got two beasts in the sport, right? You know this well. A professional baseball player is going to get into the Hall of Fame if they can even just get bat on wood 3 out of 10 times, right? And it's the same thing with cold calling, right? Bat on ball, whatever, wood on ball, whatever you want to say, right? Same thing with cold calling, right? If you could get really solid 2, 3, 4 great conversations out of 10 connects, you're a Hall of Famer. But most people, they're trying to do all these things, use all these tools, use all these technologies, use all this data to like somehow magically take the 10 and convert 10. It's just not going to happen, right? So if you're just human, you have something of value, you're reaching the right audience, you got them on the phone, and you just deliver a message that's somewhat relevant, a topic even, you're going to find success. And by the way, it takes 33 for everyone that's buying right now, right? 33 live conversations before you find one that's like ready to go, and everyone's given up at like 1 or 2, right? So that's the bigger problem, is like they're just not doing enough, and they don't understand the math. And the math says that you're going to get more no's than you are going to get yeses. And that's just a part of the process. You cannot change that. Not right now. You can with follow-up when timing's better, maybe a little bit of a different message. But if you stick to the fundamentals, you know the math, and you just get the reps in, success will follow. No different than getting at the plate and just swinging, right?
Yeah, totally. So for those that have asked questions or commented, thanks. Feel free to any others to keep chiming in. So Greg, you started Reveneer with kind of phone first, and kind of you went through that 2007 email proliferation time as well. Tell us more about that.
Well, I always had this thesis that phone could work. I understood the statistics, I understood the numbers, and I saw the value in it. But I didn't find a lot of organizations doing it, or doing it the right way, doing it well. And so that was the gap that I set out to fill with Reveneer. So we believe in phone first for all the reasons that I talked about. If somebody has a propensity to pick up the phone, then you want to get them on the phone and have a conversation. And so that's what we built a cadence on, which is phone first, no voicemail. And people always want to argue that. And just on that point, I say, it doesn't matter to me if you leave voicemail or not. What I'm against is entire organizations where everyone on the floor is doing something different. Somebody's calling twice, leaving a voicemail, calling twice, leaving a voicemail, someone else leaving voicemail every time. That is a nightmare for sales leadership because you have no idea what your metrics are. So we believe in phone first, no voicemail through a set number of dials, typically something in the 12 to 15 range on any particular prospect, on any one prospect. If we don't get them by phone first, which means, like we talked about, they're not in that group of people that pick up the phone, then we want to go to email sequencing, which is not email marketing like HubSpot style. This is one-to-one emails set up in sequence. We use SalesLoft for that. That is a short message from the SDR to the prospect. Each one is different. We're going to run those about every 3 or 4 days in sequence. And of course, we are using LinkedIn in a very targeted way, but not in any kind of blanket blasting or anything like that. So that's the cadence we set up. And again, my message to everyone is, it doesn't matter what we're doing. It doesn't matter if you believe something should be different. My number one thing for organizations, particularly the sales leaders, set a cadence and have everybody adhere to it. And you can do it through tools like Outreach and SalesLoft, or they can do it manually. If you have everyone doing something different, it's going to be very hard to figure out what's working and what's not. And then you can hone it. You could say, well, voicemail didn't work for us, so let's not use it, or it is working, so let's keep it. But you've got to have consistency and uniformity in what you're doing. That's my number one message. But we're still phone first, and it's never failed us. I believe that the phone is and always will be a really important way to get conversations with prospects, and the numbers prove it out.
It's funny. You wonder how many, I don't know if I can use the expression ass backwards, but how many go-to-market organizations do the opposite, which is LinkedIn, email, then call. And how much of the time are people doing that just because the reps are just wimps and don't want to do the calling? Do you see that, Greg?
Well, there's what you say.
Of course, but for organizations, they come in, hey, Greg, we need your help. It's not working. It's not working. It's like, okay, well, your people are just wimps and they suck.
Well, I think on that, though, yes, we see organizations where they're not, most organizations today are not making enough dials, if they're making any at all. And most sales leaders don't know whether their people are calling or not, which is the other really fascinating thing is, you interview a head of sales who's running the floor, and they'll say, oh yeah, my people are 40% outbound, and then you ask to see the metrics and the conversion rates, they don't have them. So that's really common. But to be fair to the SDRs and the BDRs, if you're not trained to do outbound calling, like really trained, like if they haven't spent a couple of weeks training you to do outbound, or they haven't hired a trainer, or they haven't sent you to specifically outbound phone calling training, you should have no expectation that that person is going to be able to get on the phone and do this. It is not something you can just hire someone and say, I want you to start calling tomorrow, or say, I'm going to sit you next to someone who knows how to call and you're going to pick it up by some magic. You've got to be trained at least in the 7 objections that make up virtually all first objections on the phone. There's 7 of them. You can handle them. But if you don't know that, you're done on that first 10 seconds. So I think we got to be fair to our reps and say, yes, they're not calling enough, but most organizations are not training them in how to do it. They're just going out there and saying, hey, the quarter's not going so well. I need you guys to make calls, and that's not going to work.
Gotcha. So great info there. Thanks. So Ryan, you got a cool study you want to tell us about?
Well, I think it's interesting to piggyback on what Greg just shared there, right? And we've talked about this the entire session so far around, some of the math of outbound. I shared earlier, 20 to 40%. If you take a list, you call it enough times, especially in Greg's cadence of just calling first, you're gonna get 20 to 40% of your list on the phone. But I call this the sales acceleration industrial complex. So it's not even just about leadership and the reps themselves. They're getting fed with this data from the sequencers, right? So Outreach, industry leader, hundreds of $1 million raised, $1 billion valuation. They published this study or a report on their website. This is back in 2019. We can link it in the show so people can see this around what is an effective outbound baseline. Like, how do I know I'm being successful in outbound? And it says after 250 deliveries that you should expect a 12% top line response. 12%. And this is when you start with email, LinkedIn, then maybe calls, because that's how they run their sequences versus calling. What did we share earlier? We shared earlier that if you just call, in Greg's point, you're going to be at 20 to 40%. So you will get 2, 3, 4, almost 5 times more, depending on how you want to run the map. Top line responses, four times at least in top line responses by just calling, right? But the top industry leaders in the market today, the sequencers, they're telling you that this is success. And if you break that down even further, it's in the data. It says that only 2.9% of that 12% is coming from the email. The rest of that top line percent defined as it includes return calls, emails, or other points of contact. So it could be a social or something of that nature. Getting back to Greg's point, so that's fascinating. You should link it in there. You can geek out about that any day. But 12%, it's kind of a joke. If I just called through that list, if I called through the list 2 or 3 times, I would already get to probably 12, 15%, right? Just calling. And what you'll notice is that by adding those other touch points and going back to what we talked about with the same CID, this is assuming you use the same CID. If I'm firing the same CID over and over, and I'm leaving voicemails and I'm compounding that into email, I've seen that actually reduces the likelihood of someone getting on the phone. So you don't actually want to leave a crumb or a trail in those first touch points. Greg's process, I align perfect. Like we're in violent agreement to your words here, Randy, is you want to call. You don't want to call too heavy and too often. You don't want to come on their radar as, hey, I'm a salesperson, because that can reduce your chances of actually getting someone who would otherwise pick up. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but it's really fascinating to look at, because that was 2019. 2019 email deliverability, only 3% response over the email and 12% top line. Has it gotten easier or has it gotten harder now that we're moving into 2023? Right. So I'd be really surprised to see what they say as the top line reply now. It's probably sub 10% or less.
Yeah, totally. All the Google traps and everything else. So, Greg, you talked before about, when I was accusing some sales folks being wimpy in terms of not wanting to do reach outs, you kind of defended them, talking about, hey, the training that you have to have in order to be equipped. But talk a little bit more, because this is what you're, kind of hiring and training and firing, I guess, occasionally, but kind of from the DNA of callers, kind of what do you look for? Or what
this is another area where the science has changed a lot since you were at EMC, Randy, and we're in the early stages of our careers, where there was a strong parallel between athletes and competitiveness into any sales role, particularly into the BDR and the early stage roles. Nothing wrong with that. Competition is a part of sales, and people who are competitive will likely gravitate to success in sales. However, it also discounts other kinds of competitiveness or other kinds of ways that people are driven in this role. So we see across our organization of a couple hundred SDRs is there's a wide range of profiles, psychological profiles, introverts versus extroverts. They all can be successful with the right training. That's my belief. What is required is a desire to do the job, and it's one of those difficult learning curves. So what I look for is someone that has experienced something really difficult and then stayed with it until they developed muscle memory and overcame that. So you think about things like learning how to play a musical instrument, learning a foreign language. And of course, there are a million sports analyses like swinging a golf club, which is extremely frustrating. If somebody stayed through the process of building muscle memory to get to the other side, then they are typically the kind that will stay and build muscle memory in the SDR role, versus just saying, I can't do this, it's too hard, and I'll quit. That's what we want the most. But don't be confused that it has to be an athlete, because it doesn't. And the other thing is what drives people. Some people are driven by competing with other people, but a lot of people are just driven by their own setting goals for themselves and achieving those goals. So they're much more self-driven than they are in competitiveness. So I think really anybody can be successful in this, provided they have the ability to stick with it through the muscle memory phase, which for outbound calling, to me, I would say certainly 6-8 weeks, something like that, going to about 90 days. And we've got to give them the ability to do that if they have the training. Again, you got to have the training. But that's something that I think when we look at the organizations, I actually love people on the introverted scale for outbound calling, because they tend to be analytical and listening. They're really listening to what people are saying before they speak. And I think that can work out really well.
Yeah, it's a total opposite from, again, what we used to be. When I was kind of doing the training and the hiring for the inside sales at EMC, you'd go out to, take a group of, interview candidates out to the bar and kind of see how, people's rapport and outgoingness and all that stuff. But you brought up some fantastic points. So on the kind of with what you've seen with phone ready leads, kind of using them, kind of increased connect rates have been pretty impressive, right?
Yeah, and I'd known of Ryan for a long time, but never really worked with phone ready leads. We had a particular case where connect rate was really low. We had we're working for our clients, so obviously that's not acceptable. We have to be able to produce results. We can't blame it on connect rate. And I want to say, Ryan, if I'm remembering, I think we were in the low 2s on connect rate, which is really tough to make something work. And so we worked with phone ready leads, which is essentially, they're providing leads that we know people pick up on. And we were able to get to somewhere in the low 20s. I want to say 24, 25% connect rate on that particular project. And, that was really eye-opening for me. And I like we talked about pulling the black marble out of the jar of white marbles. If you know it's somebody that picks up the phone, that dramatically changes the game statistically for you. So, we don't use phone ready leads across the board because our business model is as a managed service. It's not a fit for everyone, but we use it in cases where we're struggling with connect rate.
Gotcha. And then, so Ryan, amazing. People can basically go on average from kind of one connection every 20 to one connection every 3 or 4. Kind of what's the secret sauce in there? How do you do it?
That's magic, No, at the end of the day, we shared some of the things that that come up, but you can think of phone ready leads like a predictive algorithm. All right, I explain it as it's the last mile of lead generation. It's like what lead scoring has done for marketing automation, we're doing for your phone numbers. And so we sit between your list and before you make calls, you send us your list, we'll run it through our process. And what our process is doing is trying to identify these signals that give us a predictive or a likelihood that somebody is more likely reachable versus, again, workable or bad. I mentioned the 3 lead types earlier. So you send us a list, we run through our process, we send it back. How's it done? It's a combination of some technology nowadays. There's technology that gives us some of these signals, but the real secret sauce is that there's no secret sauce. I mean, we just do the work that you're going to do it anyway, faster, cheaper, more efficiently. We document the outcome and send it back. So if you want to go do it yourself, for the most part, there's a lot more that I've learned over the last few years as I've productized this, but you can read chapter 6 of my book, Outbound Sales No Fluff. It's on my LinkedIn profile. We can even link it in the show. It talks about a lot of these things. But we just do that as a managed service. It's a tech-enabled service that will dramatically increase your productivity when it comes to phone.
It's crazy, huge value, of course, there. So, Jeff, sorry I didn't really get to yours. Sandler would be the one for sure that I recommend on the training side of things, and would be happy to follow up with you offline with that. So, Ryan and Greg, awesome, great content. Certainly all about the phone, getting more conversations to get based on the efficient dials, connect rates that then can help you get more meetings, increase pipeline, and then therefore sell more. So it's all about leveraging the phone to sell more. So for Greg at Reveneer, you can see his site here, reveneer.com. So if you want to,
it's actually .io there, Randy. So
sorry, okay, reveneer.io.
Yep.
Sorry about that. And so just make sure if you're going to kind of use the Reveneer outsourcing, you ask for the kind of phone ready leads inside. So kind of like the old Intel chip inside. And then phone ready leads as well, that has the kind of secret sauce there to help you improve your connect rate. So Greg and Ryan, thank you so much. Next week on Tech Sales Insights, we have Phil Castillo, who's a great longtime industry sales leader currently at CommScope. So everybody, thanks for watching. Pass along the word to your friends. And Kayla just said, will this be recorded to rewatch? Yes, all the Tech Sales Insights are recorded. So you can go to salescommunity.com to see, I think this is 147 of them that we've done. And by chance, we're booked, I think, every week now for over the next 5 years. And Ryan, thanks for putting that post in there. So, all right, everybody, have a great week. Happy selling. Use the phone and sell more.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.